The National Museum of Toys and Miniatures welcomes you to Comic Book Characters. Did you know that comic books have been around since the 1930s? And newspaper comic strips have been around even longer. Many of our favorite toys are characters from comic strips and comic books. These toys allow us to act out the adventures that can be found on the printed page. Comic strips are short comics, usually only one row of frames, that were printed in the funny pages of newspapers. The Gumps was a popular comic strip by Sidney Smith that started in 1917. Andy Gump and his family weren't superheroes, they were ordinary people with ordinary lives. Joseph Patterson, editor and publisher of the Chicago Tribune, came up with the idea for the Gumps, thinking that a comic strip about everyday people would resonate with the average reader. He was right. The Gumps was so popular with kids that arcade manufacturing made this cast-iron Andy Gump car toy in the 1920s. You can find Andy Gump and his car in the iconic Toys hallway. Like the Gumps, Little Orphan Annie started as a comic strip in 1924. Reporter Harold Gray wanted to create a character that was independent and self-made. He also wanted the character to be a girl because there were so many comic strips that featured boys at the time. This oilcloth doll of Little Orphan Annie is from the 1920s and can be found in the Toys from the Attic exhibit. From 1930 to 1942, kids could listen to the adventures of Little Orphan Annie on the radio and enroll in the Radio Orphan Annie Secret Society. Members received this free Radio Orphan Annie telematic decoder pin. At the end of every radio show, the announcer would provide a secret coded message that could only be solved with the pin. Usually, the coded message was a clue for the next week's adventure. The Radio Orphan Annie telematic decoder pin was also famously featured in the 1983 film A Christmas Story. You can find this pin from 1938, owned by a Kansas boy named Dumont Reed, in the Toys from the Attic exhibit. Buck Rogers in the 25th century AD, the first science fiction comic strip, was introduced in 1929. In the story, Buck, a World War I hero, is exposed to radioactive gas. He falls into a state of suspended animation and wakes up in the year 2419. The first toy ray gun ever produced was the Buck Rogers XZ-31 rocket pistol by Daisy in 1934. The pistol caused such a stir at Christmas that year that the line at Macy's stretched around the block. This XZ-31 rocket pistol can be found with the Orphan Annie telematic decoder pin in the Toys from the Attic exhibit. Comic books are much longer than newspaper comic strips, giving the authors and artists the space to create in-depth worlds, stories, and characters to capture readers' imaginations. Some of the most popular comic book characters are superheroes. In fact, it was the introduction of one particular superhero in 1938 that kicked off what would come to be known as the Golden Age of Comics. Which of these superheroes was the first to appear in a comic book and began the Golden Age of Comics? A. Superman, B. Batman, C. Robin, D. Wonder Woman, E. Spider-Man. If you said Superman, you're right. Superman made his DC Comics debut in 1938. These comic book toys by Mego Corporation date to the 1970s and can be found in the iconic Toys hallway. All of the toys we've seen so far were created due to the popularity of the characters' comic strips or comic books that had been released first. With Star Wars, however, the opposite is true. The first Star Wars movie premiered in 1977 and was so popular, people clamored for anything Star Wars related. In response to the film's popularity, the Star Wars saga was then debuted as a Marvel comic book later that same year, running through 1986. After a 29-year break, Marvel brought back the Star Wars comic book in 2015. For fans, the Star Wars comic books help continue the story between movies and expand and grow the storyline. These Star Wars action figures can be seen in the iconic Toys hallway. In 1964, Hassenfeld Brothers, which later became Hasbro, created G.I. Joe, a 12-inch soldier figure. Due to beliefs of the time, the company wasn't sure boys would be interested in playing with dolls, so they called G.I. Joes action figures. The first G.I. Joe comic book was also created in 1964 to promote the action figure. In order to inspire a sense of adventure, the creators called the book Action Reading for Boys. A G.I. Joe collection that belonged to a Michigan boy named Rick Gunter can be found in the Toys from the Attic exhibit. Now that you've heard all about these characters from comic strips and comic books, test your knowledge with this quiz. When did the Star Wars comic book make its debut? A. 1977, B. 1979, C. 1982, D. 1985. Star Wars debuted as a Marvel comic book in 1977. Which of these terms did Hasbro coin to advertise G.I. Joe? A. Action toy, B. Adventure figure, C. Adventure toy, D. Action figure. Hasbro created the term action figure for G.I. Joe. Children could use their secret decoder pin to decode special messages during which of the following? A. The Little Orphan Annie radio show, B. The Little Orphan Annie television show, C. The Little Orphan Annie Broadway musical, D. The Little Orphan Annie movie. Children could use the secret decoder pin to decode special messages at the end of every Little Orphan Annie radio show. Thanks for joining us for this TM2Go video. Now that you've explored our collection, download the instructions to create your own miniature comic book. Don't forget to share your creation with us on social media and share the activity with your friends. We'll see you next time.